maybe this new chapter will be worth it. I mean, Teshi's kind of been on a roll recently, so hopefully this too will fall into line with the rest of that. Bittersweet Candy Bowl Intermission / Chapter 91 Behind Closed Doors is the new worst chapter in the comic. Another in a long line of new worst chapters in the comic that Teshi has been writing since Eternal Flame. Can it really be that bad though? Well, the answer is yes, unless you have severe Teshiitis, in which case the answer is no. But don't worry, my inflicted friends, this video is the cure. So let's start out by asking ourselves, what are we doing here? As stated by Teshi, she felt like the Paulo and Daisy strife arc was too bare bones, and wanted to spice it up a little more, so she came up with the whole new chapter. A noble goal to be sure, and it's nice to see she's still thinking about her story, but this wasn't the way to do it. This is even worse when you consider she admits pretty much everyone already knew what was going on, making this chapter superfluous. So right out of the gate, this whole intermission chapter is unnecessary. There's nothing wrong with wanting to flesh out your world, but when so much time has passed and so much already happened surrounding this drama that has already been resolved, it's kinda hard to do that. The other issue is that the story afterwards was not written with this chapter in mind. You have to have a gentle hand to make sure the knife doesn't slip on the operating table, opening up plot holes and confusion. And unfortunately for us, this knife fell into the story and slipped all over the place. But in order to understand the black plot hole that is behind closed doors, we have to understand the story as it existed before this chapter intermission came into existence. Number 1. Paulo, Daisy, and Abby. Paulo and Abby have been at odds since day one, but it wasn't until Guest of Honor did things start to take a turn for the serious. Up until then, it had been Paulo teasing Abby and Abby saying Paulo is a moron. Now they're having super happy fun times with each other in the bathroom. I mean, who hasn't wanted to be choked out in a bathroom? Wait, what? And all of this was over Abby accusing Paulo of trying to take advantage of Daisy. And so this leads Paulo on a new path, one where he wants to avoid Abby and to a certain extent, Daisy. That is until a particularly scathing phone call between the two in Golden Hour that sees Paulo start to avoid her at full tilt in the following chapters and making sure everyone knows how not interested he is in Daisy. We see it in the way he flirts with Courtney in front of her, or how he talks about how hot Sandy is. Both times, it is evident that the reason for this is Abby. Even when Abby isn't present, he makes an effort to avoid her just to be safe. When the walls come tumbling down in love again, Abby and Daisy break up when she finds out that Abby assaulted Paulo in the bathroom at the con. Abby storms off, and later we see Daisy say that Abby will never come between them again. And so it is made very clear without a hint of uncertainty that Paulo is avoiding Daisy because of Abby, and Daisy very clearly is putting the blame on Abby. And with all that being said, let's hop on over to the new chapter. Number 2. Behind Closed Doors. Behind Closed Doors starts out innocent enough. Since Mike and Lucy haven't been on speaking terms for quite some time, and also she's just not there anymore, and Sandy hasn't beaten the gamer out of him, Mike is playing games with Paulo. Things get all mushy, and Mike gets a knock at the door.
Oh my god, there's a bang at the door!
It's Haley here to inform Mike that the goddess is here, and she's pretty mad. Today is the monthly Swordsvale meeting, and Mike forgot it because he was playing games with Paulo. Paulo hears Abby is coming and dives off the bed. He scrambles into the closet and tells Mike to pretend he wasn't there. Haley calls dibs on the computer before Mike can make his move, and while she's been a bit bratty, she at least doesn't rat Paulo out. She might be a brat, but she ain't no snitch. And so anyway, Sue grills Mike on why he wasn't at the library while Daisy pops up out of nowhere despite never being shown entering the room. I have no idea how Mike managed to miss such a large person. Yes, I understand this is the joke, but it's not a great one. The whole thing about supporting Abby's hobbies is a direct follow-up to the realization in Guest of Honor. Stacy puts her 2 cents in and is shut down by Mike. So they begin their meeting, and I was kinda interested in learning about the game, get a little bit of world building out of this. But of course all of that is glazed over and we just get Paulo laying in a closet looking very feminine with all of his curves. And so the meeting is over, but Abby notices Mike looking over at his closet. The Korat lets slip, he's worried about Paulo, and this puts the others on high alert. Daisy seems concerned, but Sue is unamused. Mike comes up with the story about how he was late because Paulo was asking for a cheat code for a 2-player game, but Sue doesn't seem to buy it. Also, why is Amaya sitting on the floor? Isn't she short enough? This is when the real point of the chapter begins, the roast of Paulo. Abby and Sue talk some shit, which I will talk about in detail later, and Mike and Daisy go on the defense. Also, Mike is looking very feminine with all of his courage. The moment Daisy even gives a whiff of defending Paulo, Abby puts on his best Abraham impression and Daisy folds like a house of cards. And so she launches into a tirade about how dumb and stupid Paulo is. Mike sticks to his guns, but Sue steps in to remind him of his treatment of Lucy. Remember, she wasn't around during this time. Also, this is in extremely poor taste, but don't worry, we'll talk about that too. And so Sue and Abby keep circle jerking about Paulo, and then when Daisy remains silent, Abby calls her out again. Holy shit, this guy is toxic as hell. And so Daisy has to pop off again. And then some more shit talking, some irony from Stacy, and Daisy yells about Paulo sucking. And Mike just stands there looking anxious. So they all leave and Daisy says she's gonna skip out on the next meeting, and Mike runs back upstairs to check on Paulo, who doesn't cry? Imagine my shock and awe. And Mike tries to play off the whole ordeal, but Paulo doesn't want to hear it. Nothing can stop him. And so he starts mentally writing his manifesto, moaning that nobody defends him, even though Mike did, and he goes to visit Rachel in a scene that mirrors the one from Burnt Bridges. And then they fuck. And then I jump in front of a train. But not before unpacking all of this. Number 3, the character assassination of, well, everyone. It is most hilarious that this chapter also coincided with the massive document The Character Assassination of Abby. Not only does Abby undergo even more character assassinations, so does Sue, and Daisy, and Paulo. But we're gonna start off with Abby. Boy, for a character that Teshi so desperately doesn't want us to see as bad, he sure does act abusive towards Daisy. He gives her threatening looks, gaslights her, coerces her into doing and saying things she is very visibly uncomfortable with. What a cool guy. All this does is further prove Paulo's point that Abby is a psychopath. But Abby was already a nutter. What's even worse is that Teshi brought Sue down with him. Now I know you're all gonna say I'm biased because Susan is my waifu and Paulo x Sue is the best ship, but no. I'm going to use objective information gleaned from the comic to defend this. And the best chapter that displays everything wrong with Sue's characterization here is Critical Hit. For those who have the time, I cannot recommend enough you pause this video now and go check out the video I made on that chapter. But if you don't, here's what you gotta know. Sue spends all of Critical Hit being self-conscious about not being able to interpret some art. She takes this out on Paulo and David, but mainly Paulo, and this all comes to a head when the two literally butt heads and start arguing again. Sue uses Lucy as a weapon against Paulo, something she regrets immediately, apologizes for, and opens up about her insecurity. Both cats calm down enough to explain how they handle not understanding things, and walk away with a newfound understanding of each other, even if they don't necessarily see eye to eye on it still. Yes, I am aware that Sue talks shit about Paulo behind his back, but so did Mike. And now he's all like, oh, I don't want to say anything mean about Paulo. Is he only acting this way because he knows Paulo is sitting in the closet? If Paulo wasn't there, would he also get in on the shit talking? I guess he just didn't know Paulo could hear him before. Anyway, back to Sue. With their understanding in mind, it seems kind of weird that Sue would just go back to talking shit like this. It's like none of her character development or anything that happened in Critical Hit mattered. And what's worse, she uses Lucy as a weapon against Mike. Did she not learn anything from last time? At least she was apologetic towards Paulo for doing it. Here she's a total vindictive bitch about it. And yes, I will refrain from saying this is because she cares about Paulo a lot more than Mike. Oh wait, she's just overall awful in a way that she has never been before. This is pure vitriol, hatred, and it feels horribly forced. Not just from her, but from Daisy too. Daisy just throws all her morals out the window for the sake of making this chapter make sense with what happens later, but again, it feels so forced. Yes, what she's saying is technically true, but none of this justifies this chapter's existence. And then there's Paulo, who in a surprising turn of events doesn't just cry. Like, I am actually shocked he didn't cry. There's like some wetness in his eyes, but not any actual tears. So he storms off and goes to Rachel to use her to
fuck the pain away. Fuck the pain away. Fuck the pain away. Fuck the pain away. Fuck the pain away.
Which also feels really scummy and was only added to show that Paulo is bad too, which is not great in a chapter where you want people to sympathize with him. Sending him off to bang Rachel, especially with what we know now, looks really bad. I know this is meant to be read with that not being in mind, but it leaves such a sour taste in my mouth and honestly gives him less of a pedestal to be on after this when he starts ignoring Daisy. He very clearly is only doing this because he is upset. He is just using her. You know, characters are allowed to just be the victim without some gray morality thing. Why does he have to stoop down too? Of all the times to not just have it end with him crying, this is the one time that it would have actually benefited his character and made sense. Number 4, continuity. The biggest issue with this chapter is now it puts everything later into a tailspin of, huh? What? I've already mentioned what happens after the events of Behind Closed Doors, but let's take a closer look, shall we? With Behind Closed Doors, it now means that Paulo's weirdness is because he's upset over Daisy talking shit, or at least that's a big part of it, along with Abby threatening him with violence if he doesn't stay away from her. Table for One doesn't have anything that is explicitly broken because of this chapter, but it is odd that Mike did not pick up on what Paulo was doing, and it is also strange that we never see them talking about that day in his room. I guess you could say that the conversation happened off screen, but Behind Closed Doors creates such an elephant in the room that it's kind of weird that a conversation about that day wouldn't be shown or it would never be mentioned again. Paulo also seems confused as to why Rachel is cozying up to him when he went over to her house to
Fuck the pain away.
Or does he not know what the word boo means? I find it highly unlikely that someone who flirts all the time has never heard that term before. I guess if that's the case, this is also a weird thing even without the context of Behind Closed Doors. Model Girlfriend fares a little worse since we see Paulo actively flirting with other girls in front of Daisy. This is a direct reference to the phone call conversation Golden Hour where she calls him out for pretending he doesn't do this in front of her. Paulo then talks to Sue like all is hunky-dory and like she wasn't also talking shit about him. Like just all casual like. Teshi said this is because he doesn't care of what Sue thinks, but like really? He's just gonna pretend she didn't say all that shit or lash out against her or anything? I find this very odd. That's not a great explanation for this at all, at least not for me. And by the way, this explanation doesn't really work because Paulo is very clearly mad at all of them. If he didn't care what Sue thought, why did he say they? If this was just about Daisy, why did he say they? However, Paulo does go out of his way to talk about how hot he thinks Sandy is right in front of Daisy after hearing her cry over Sandy forgetting her. But before that, he looks like he wants to comfort Daisy, but looks worried and then backs off. Very clearly because of their phone call in Golden Hour, plus Abby is standing right there and he doesn't want Abby to accuse him of trying to make a move on Daisy. In Love Again, things fare even worse. Paulo overtly ignores Daisy again in favor of flirting with Courtney, continuing his behavior from Model Girlfriend. He even gets called out for flirting with a bunch of girls by Madison. Then Daisy starts to believe that Paulo hates her and Mike acts totally and completely surprised by this, like in a way that would not lead one to believe that he is hiding something. I know that people will use the excuse of him just covering for Paulo, but can't say he's good at lying because he's never been shown to be good at it. He is legitimately confused by why Paulo would dislike Daisy. He even says that him, Michael Korat, will ask Paulo about why he's upset. What would the purpose of this be if he already knew? I guess you could say he was just further trying to cover for him, but Jesus, I don't know, isn't this just a big stretch? And then we get to the big scene where Paulo breaks his silent treatment for both Daisy and Abby and flat out says he's been avoiding them because of what happened in the bathroom at the con. I guess it is technically possible he never wanted to bring up that day in Mike's room, but if he's being a spiteful little gremlin, why would he also not drop the bomb he was in the room that day? Again, another stretch. And so at the start of Unspoken Rule, Daisy tries talking to Paulo again with much more success since Abby is no longer in the picture. Oh sure, he's still blowing her off at first, but he is at least talking to her, a step up from totally ignoring her and saying things he knows will get Abby off his back. It's not until Daisy said Abby wasn't going to her party that he actually decides to listen to her. Daisy asks if Paulo is avoiding her because of what Abby did, and he says it didn't help. This is because the other half of this is because of their argument in Golden Hour. I guess now it's also because of what happened in Behind Closed Doors, but this is never mentioned. I guess it's also possible that Paulo didn't want to talk about it, but if they're clearing the air here, why not mention it? It feels like if it was such a massive deal to him that he would go out of his way to try to avoid Daisy, wouldn't he say something about this now? Anything? And the way the conversation goes, it is very clearly about her feeling bad over their phone call. This very clearly is her saying it was Abby putting her up to all of it, but she had a choice to not talk shit about him in Mike's room. Mike had her back. Yes, I know Abby guilt-tripped her into saying all that, but at the end of Behind Closed Doors, Daisy is seemingly happy that she talked all that shit about Paulo and thinks he sucks. We do get some shots of her looking a little uncomfortable about this whole situation beforehand, but by the end, she seems completely on board the Paulo sucks train. Now all of a sudden she's acting like she cares about him and is upset he won't talk to her. This is something that's an issue throughout all 4 of these chapters. And we never have a moment to see her regretting saying all of these things. In this new context, she's putting all the blame on Abby for something that really wasn't all that justified. Like Mike said, she shouldn't let them pressure her into gossiping. I know that later on in Time Out that Abby says that people talk shit about Paulo behind his back all the time, but that wasn't about any one particular time. And even if it was, we saw what he was talking about in Critical Hit and in Clean Slate. There is such a massive elephant in the room that is being danced around because these chapters were not made with Behind Closed Doors in mind. And if they were, I guarantee that Teshi would have a field day with putting in a scene where Paulo and Daisy, or even all of them, talk about it. It would be an insane bombshell to drop alongside Paulo telling them that Abby choked him at the con, and could lead to an interesting interaction in Unspoken Role where Daisy apologizes for it. Number 5. Things that I liked. Upon editing this video, I realized that I don't want this to be a total dog pile, so I'm going to try and find some things that I liked about this chapter intermission. Well, first off, it's neat that Teshi went back to emulate the older modern style, even if it's very similar to what we have in the present. The concept of this chapter, the idea of someone hiding in a closet listening to all their friends shit all over them, and with the added benefit of one of them knowing they're in there and trying to stop the conversation, is ripe for drama. In isolation, this is a very strong idea. I like seeing Mike and Paulo playing games and having a good time. We should see more of that. I like the dramatic full bodies we got of Paulo and Daisy. I like this Lies classic gag in the background. These are things I already talked about, but I like that Haley didn't just rat Paulo out. I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that Paulo didn't just bawl his eyes out, even if it would have benefited him to do so in this case. I like Sue. Not like particularly in this chapter, but it is nice to see her, even if she is being awful. I liked it when it was over. Number 6. Now what? Despite me liking the concept of this chapter on paper, I can't say that it works very well in the context of everything else that happens around it. I really try to be optimistic about this chapter in the beginning, but I can't lie to myself anymore. It fucking sucks, and a lot of people agree. If you really had severe Teshiitis, you could explain all of this away, but the level of mental gymnastics required would make you an Olympic gold medalist, the likes of which the world has never seen. If we even got one scene of Daisy looking remorseful for her words after all was said and done, it would solve quite a few of these issues, but we don't. I was waiting for that moment to come, for Daisy to feel bad about what she'd said in the room, but no, she stands by all the nasty things she said. It makes her really unsympathetic in all of this. I believe that these 4 chapters were not showing that Paulo was justified for how he was acting, but with Behind Closed Doors, it kind of justifies his behavior here. Like, yeah, fuck all of these guys. You don't owe them anything. He has a right to want to avoid all of them. Except for Sue, apparently. And now the meaning of everything in these chapters has totally changed. I can't imagine Paulo being justified for acting this way is what Teshi originally meant. I get her wanting to fill out this arc, but we really didn't need it. Even she says it wasn't all that necessary. I had high hopes that maybe she could thread the needle, and maybe she did, but the thread is all frayed and torn and parts of it are still on the wrong side of the needle. It may be hard for me to say because I was already very familiar with this story before the change, so it will be very interesting to see what people who are new to the comic that read it with behind closed doors being inserted in between Golden Hour and Dial Tone think of it. But the most important thing is, what do you guys think? Does behind closed doors break canon, or does it help? Does it stretch things too much, or does it fill things out and make it better? Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.